We're five. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our mid-semester residency session, at which we'll have a presentation from our social justice speaker. I hope that where you are, where you're sitting, where you're watching this, it's a wonderful spring morning, and that you're ready for an interesting presentation today. We are together for the first time as a full community since the passing of our colleague, our friend, a teacher, a mentor, Dr. Jim Henderson. And so I'd like for us just to have a moment to remember the wonderful ways in which he touched so many of our lives. So maybe we'll just be quiet for a minute and think about the goodness of Jim. Thank you very much. And we will have a fuller remembrance and acknowledgement of Dr. Henderson when we are together at residency in July. So look forward to that. So today, our social justice speaker, as you can see from your screen, is Dr. OWEN CARDWELL, a graduate of our program, MLK specialization, and ECL major. And we are very, very excited about this opportunity. OWEN, Dr. Cardwell, I know him as OWEN. I'm moving now to knowing him as Dr. Cardwell. Dr. Cardwell is the 2017 winner of the Virgil Alexander Wood Award for Excellence in Scholarship. And the first winner of that award, by the way, was Dr. Greg Bailey, whose work was on economics, the beloved economic community, and Dr. Chris Vopero was his chair. So that was he was the first winner of the prize. And now we have our second winner, Dr. OWEN CARDWELL. And many of you, I suspect, may not know who Virgil Alexander Wood is and why we would have such an award. And so I'd like to just take a moment to help you understand why we have this award. So Virgil Alexander Wood is a true scholar practitioner. From his very early days to this very moment, Virgil works hard every day in various iterations of freedom movements and is committed to inclusion, to equity, and to social justice. He worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King in the days of the freedom movement, and the MLK specialization exists because of Dr. Virgil Wood. Dr. Wood had the idea for the program. It was his dream and his vision that he brought to the Union Institute, and he hoped that through the MLK specialization, students and faculty would work towards extending and expanding and challenging the legacy that Dr. King and his work and his colleagues left for all of us. Virgil is, in my judgment, a wise owl whose spirit and commitment guide us in the MLK specialization, and one of the ways in which we honor Dr. Wood is through this award of the Virgil Alexander Wood Award for Excellence in Scholarship. And the other way in which I think we honor and recognize Dr. Wood's contribution is through the work that all of you are doing each and every day as you move through the union program. So now to introduce Dr. Cardwell to you. I asked Owen to send me 3 things that he wanted me to say and 3 things that he didn't want me to say. He did neither. So it's all my creation. And it is truly, truly just fun and an honor to present Dr. Cardwell to you. In my judgment, Dr. Cardwell is a man of calm, a man of vision, a man of dedication. He is an active scholar practitioner, absolutely in the mode of Dr. Wood. He is a giant in his voice, in his kindness, in his understanding, in his thoughtfulness. It was a real pleasure and privilege to serve as the chair of his dissertation committee, and it's an honor, Dr. Cardwell, to present you to all of us as our social justice speaker for this spring 2017 mid-semester residency. So with joy and excitement, I turn this program over to you. Dr. Cardwell is going to speak with us for a time, and then we're going to have questions and answers. And I think you know that you type your questions up on the screen. I'll try to collect them and manage them and relay the questions to Dr. Cardwell. So that's how we'll move through the day. Presentation, then question and discussion, and then time for wrap up and a break. So Dr. Cardwell, you're on.
Thank you, Nancy, for your kind and generous introduction. The check is in the mail. I also want to thank the committee. I don't know who made up the committee, but I thank the committee for this distinctive honor. I want to thank Dr. Refanti and Dr. Boxell and my lifelong mentor, Dr. Virgil Wood, who made up my dissertation committee. And I want to say good morning to my fellow travelers and Unionites. I want to share with you today a presentation. I don't know what's happening here.
Owen,
there it is. It's finally come up. Had a little technical difficulty. I want to share with you this morning a presentation that we're calling Heroic Journey as GPS. And for some, there it is. So on January 29th, 1962, Dr. Linda Woodruff and I walked up the steps of E.C. Glass High School in Lynchburg, Virginia, and we became the first 2 African Americans to attend E.C. Glass High School, and thereby launching the desegregation of schools in Lynchburg. This was a court-ordered case, and 2 of the other litigants were Brenda Hughes and Cecilia Jackson. Originally, there were 27 complainants, but bit by bit, they dropped out because of economic pressure that was placed on the complainant's family by the majority community. Fast forward 3 months, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. comes to Lynchburg at the behest of Dr. Virgil Wood to support our desegregation efforts. I had a chance to not only meet Dr. King, but in those days there was no Holiday Inn, there was no microtel hotel for African American travelers in the South, and very often when we traveled, we stayed in homes of local residents. Dr. King stayed in the home of Dr. George Jackson, who was a local dentist, and after a community meeting held in the auditorium of E.C. Glass High School on the evening of March 25th, 1962, we left there and went to Dr. Jackson's house. I sat on the floor as a 15-year-old singing freedom songs with Dr. King. Fast forward 40 years. In 2002, as pastor of New Canaan International Church, we created a nonprofit 501c3 to work with children and families in at-risk environments. Our first effort was a partnership with the Children's Defense Fund headed by Marion Wright Edelman. We participated in a national project called One Church, 10 Families that was developed by 100 African American juvenile court judges in partnership with the Children's Defense Fund. The project was directed at juveniles who were pre-adjudicated in the juvenile system. Before they were given a sentence, they had a chance to come into this alternative program. We provided them with after-school support and with mentors. We were one of 5 demonstration sites. The other 4 were in Detroit, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Houston, Texas. Many of the participants in that program were African American males, and they were performing very often the common negative narratives that were representing African American males and that have represented African American males in the American story. You've heard these negative narratives of achievement gap, thug life, mass incarceration, absentee fathers, underemployment and unemployment, and deadbeat dads, particularly for those who are incarcerated and have to pay child support payments. But I want to suggest that that's not the whole story. The Children's Defense Fund coined the phrase during the time that we were meeting with them over a 3-year period and conducting the program. They coined the phrase cradle to prison pipeline, and later that phrase shifted to school to prison pipeline to explain this phenomenon of negative narratives that dotted the landscape in urban America. The problem was that these narratives that were being performed by many African American males concluded in incarceration or death. And so the question for us became, how can we reframe and redirect these narratives so that the jail trail is reversed? And you will notice that we didn't talk about a cradle to prison pipeline or a school to prison pipeline. We coined a new phrase that we call the jail trail, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But our theme has to do with how the heroic journey, or a question as to how the heroic journey might serve as a GPS. So the first question, of course, is exactly what is a GPS? And I know that we have doctoral students here, so I'm stating the obvious. The initials represent Global Positioning System. And the interesting thing about GPS is that it has the capacity to plot your current location, and then from your current location, you place in a desired destination, and the GPS, or the Global Positioning System, has the capability of creating the desired journey by providing a pathway from your current destination to from your current location rather, to your desired destination. Usually in a GPS, you have the capability of determining a preferred route. You can decide that you want to go all expressway, or you can determine that you want to avoid toll roads. You can decide that maybe you want to take the scenic route, and you always have the capacity to reroute when you run into difficulties or obstructions along the way. Additionally, though, a GPS system allows you to have various views in plotting your journey. I'm sorry. You have the capacity of using a terrain view, which helps with the landscape layout. You can use a traffic view, a satellite view, and even something that's a 3D view called Global Earth View. When we talk about the jail trail, part of the reason why we began referring to this phenomenon as the jail trail is Dr. Wood and I, in conversations with the Children's Defense Fund at the Haley Farm, we would argue that a pipeline is restrictive. It suggests a predictable outcome. The pipeline implies intractability, but the concept of a jail trail is more malleable. And so in his book, In Love We Trust, Dr. Wood defines the jail trail as a continuum of what's happening along the economic pathway between what he calls the ghetto house and the jailhouse. In further examining that, I resolved in my dissertation and in my research that the ways that we could examine reversing this jail trail had to do with examining the makeup of the jail trail. A trail suggests progression. So at the back end of the jail trail, we are experiencing in this country persons returning from incarceration to their families, and America does not make this process easy. There are all kinds of restrictions that are placed on these returning citizens, and so part of reversing the jail trail has to do with the way we welcome returning citizens back into our community. We call that the back end of the jail trail. But it also requires some work at the jail and prisons themselves. It necessitates a comprehensive work with these men and women while they are incarcerated, and we call this redeeming the middle. But just as important is trying to figure out a way of preventing juveniles from having contact with the juvenile justice system, because the juvenile justice system becomes a feeder system for adult incarceration. And so the front end involves reducing the number of children who come under the control of social service, through foster care, as well as those who are dropouts or who find difficulty in achieving in the public school setting. Just as an aside, within the last year or so, it has been reported that the state of Virginia, where I reside, leads the nation in incarcerating children in school for simple things like what they're terming as disorderly conduct. So the question becomes then, how do we process this idea of reversing the jail trail? We began to look at these negative narratives. I apologize for this thing that keeps popping up, but we'll work through it. We began to look at these negative narratives and to begin to formulate from research that many talk about life as a narrative. Charlotte Lindy, in her book, What is a Life Story, talks about life stories as stories that are associated and told by individuals during the course of his or her lifetime. And Linde says that these stories have to satisfy two criteria. The first criteria is that the story really points to an evaluation about the speaker and not necessarily about the way that society works or about the world works, but there also has to be some extended reportability. In other words, there has to be an applicability that resonates with the listener or with the reader, so that the listener or the reader gets the sense that, you know, this could possibly be my story, as we say, but for the grace of God, or this could possibly be my story. I can really see some commonalities in this. We also looked at the concept of narrative as performance, and Benson talks about performance as a way of bringing culture and the person into play that situates the performance within the forces of a bigger discourse like race or gender. It seemed to me that the heroic journey, as defined by Joseph Campbell, satisfied this way of looking at life's narratives as a performance narrative. Back in 1949, Joseph Campbell collected all of the hero myths and stories from every culture and from every country that he could, and he published a book out of his research called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he coined the term a monomyth. The idea is that there really is only one hero with several different iterations of that hero, and each of these hero stories make up different iterations of what the hero looks like. Campbell defines the heroic journey as the hero venturing forth from a world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. He says that fabulous forces are encountered there and a decisive victory is won, and then the hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with powers and capabilities that he can bestow upon his fellow man. I want to play this video clip, if I can get this. You had it working before. We'll move on from that. I can't get the video to play. Of course, that always happens. But Campbell described the heroic journey, and the way that Campbell described the heroic journey for me was passive and reactionary. When I began to really explore the possibilities of the heroic journey, it occurred to me that depending upon how one navigates the journey could be described as either a hero's journey, a victim's journey, or a villain's journey. I define the hero's journey pretty much as Campbell describes it, with a couple of caveats that I'll speak about in a moment. The victim's journey ends with the journeyer returning or remaining in a life of struggle. And for me, the villain's journey could be seen in the life of one who becomes a societal predator. So the question for me was, how do we move people from that victim's journey or villain's journey into a pathway so that they can begin to live heroically? I also began to, this is post-dissertation, But I had a chance to attend a week-long seminar that was sponsored by Dr. Philip Zimbardo. Those of you that are familiar with the Stanford Prison Experiment, Dr. Zimbardo was a professor of sociology at Stanford University. He came up with this concept of turning the basement of Stanford University's psychology building into a prison. He forged this experiment that was to last for 2 weeks. The experiment had to be shut down after 6 days because people played their roles too well. Out of that, he began to talk about the question. He began to raise the question as to why good people do bad things. From those years of experimentation around that question, Zimbardo began to say, well, let me also explore the flip side of that. Why is it that certain people do heroic acts? Is there a hero gene? Is there a particular upbringing that allows a person to do that? And from that, he created what he calls the Heroic Imagination Project, which explores understanding the nature of everyday heroism and the psychology of personal and social growth. He has coined this idea of moving people from being heroes in training to heroes in waiting. Once you have completed the training, then you look for opportunities to live and act in a heroic fashion. From his research, Zimbardo came up with the idea that very often in the very same situation, different people will react in different manners. The very same situation can inflame what he called the hostile imagination, which equated for me with that villain's journey. It could render most people, he has this kind of bell curve where most people kind of fit into this victim's journey, and he calls this bystanders and people being guilty of the evil of inaction. Or this same situation could produce a heroic imagination in others who would then launch on this heroic journey. Well, for me, the question became, how then can we take this idea of a heroic journey and move it from being simply a descriptive process to a prescriptive process? If we can indeed teach people how to anticipate the stages and steps of a journey, then we can move them from simply being enacted upon in the journey and being reactionary to being attentional and intentional about how they proceed on life's journey and turn it into an heroic journey. And to do that, of course, again, it requires that the person becomes attentional and intentional. The way that I began to research this was by utilizing the process of an autoethnography. My dissertation was an autoethnography. The essence of it was to look at a 5-year slice out of my life from the time that I integrated the school system in Lynchburg to the time that I became a youth civil rights leader in my hometown, and to examine how, as a young African American male in an oppressive societal situation, that for me mirrored very much the kind of situation that many young African American males found themselves in today. How could my story be informative, utilizing the heroic journey, theory U, and integral theory as a way to reframe one's life narrative? I used my story from a reflective vantage point. I felt that if I could look back and tap into some of what I was going through during that period of time, It might be instructional and informative to those young people and to those men and women coming out of incarceration that I was working with. I actually used the concept of performance autoethnography, which actually combines the two concepts of performance and autoethnography to critically reflect in the ways in which my personal life intersected and collided and communed with others in the body politic, which is in line with Spry's definition of performance autoethnography. So, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's look at this question as to how the heroic journey can serve possibly as a GPS. When we talk about being able to plot our current location and a desired destination, that has to do with being both attentive and intentional about living life heroically. But also, we talked about the different views that a GPS afforded us to have, and I liken the terrain view to the stages of the heroic journey. The traffic view has to do with the steps of the heroic journey. The satellite view was really this aqua model, and in particular the quadrant model, though in my dissertation I also did a limited examination of the lines of development, and in particular the lines of cognitive, emotional, moral, social, and spiritual development. But then Theory U would serve as sort of the Google Map 3D view. So let's look at what that looks like. The heroic journey from the terrain view has to do with the stages of the heroic journey. The stages are three. Departure or call, which describes how the hero actually sets forth. The initiation deals with the obstacles and the challenges that the hero has to overcome on the journey, and the return phase of the journey has to do with how the hero navigates the return from this tremendous journey back to the world or to the place from which he or she started. And within these phases, Campbell describes 17 identifiable steps. I would say that I did not use all 17 steps in my dissertation. I felt that there were some steps that were combined and some steps that of necessity just were not applicable to the kinds of things that I was dealing with at the time. But when we look at this idea of a terrain view, there were actually 4 different phases of my journey into authentic leadership. Initially, I started out as a school desegregator. The idea was simply to integrate the school system there. There were court cases. There was all kind of strategy being developed. The focus in Lynchburg at the time was desegregating the schools. But as we moved along, the focus became more and more moved from simply the schools, but how could we deal with public access to all facilities like movie theaters and swimming pools and restaurants. And so I moved from being simply a school desegregator to becoming a civil rights activist, and the newspaper called me actually an agitator. And in that initiation stage also, I became the youth leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee there, and so I became a youth civil rights leader. And in my return, I actually moved into what I understand to be authentic leadership. So the question that I asked and answered previously is, does the hero have to engage each of the steps, or or are some steps combined or eliminated? And for me, I determined that one doesn't have to touch every single base in order to get the concept of how a heroic journey can actually serve as a guidance system for us. When I moved to the traffic view, of course, traffic view, things become a bit more intense. In the traffic view, we actually dealt with the different steps. These are the steps that were represented in my particular journey. I'll briefly go through some of them. As an innocent, in the innocent world of my childhood, at that time, we had black and white television. Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver, were the TV shows that we looked at that represented stable, secure white families. If there were any blacks on television, it was in watching a show called Amos and Andy, where the characters were kind of step-and-fetch-it characters, or occasionally you might see a black performer on what was called the Ted Max Amateur Hour. But on that black and white TV, all of a sudden, color burst onto the scene as we saw news reports about student demonstrations, sit-in demonstrations, marches in different other parts of the country as the civil rights movement was beginning to develop some traction. My particular call to adventure had to do with my father, who was at that time secretary of the local NAACP and in charge of the membership committee. He and Dr. Virgil Wood were, among others, some of the emerging civil rights leaders in my hometown, and an opportunity presented itself to attempt to integrate the school system there. Now, I must say, Linda Woodruff and I were not the first to make that attempt. There were two other students before us, but we were in the throes of, we had just come 8 years removed from Brown versus Board of Education. The state of Virginia decided to address Brown versus Board of Education through what they call massive resistance. They created these things called pupil placement boards, and if anybody wanted to transfer from one school to another, it made no difference what color they were. They had to be approved by the pupil placement board, and of course the deck was stacked. If you were African American and you wanted to apply to go to a predominantly or an all-white high school, there was no such thing as predominantly at that time. It was either all white or all black. If you wanted to go to a white high school, you made an application, the pupil placement board turned you down. And so we had this litigation that took place. Part of the refusal of the call was, yes, there were times when I thought as a 15-year-old, 14-year-old that it wasn't worth it. We had court hearings and trying to overcome the resistance from the majority community. But I had supernatural aides that came along, Dr. Wood, my father, Dr. Martin Luther King, not so much in a proactive way, but vicariously through the influence that he had on my father and Dr. Wood and others who were adult leaders in our community at that time. We actually crossed that first threshold in January of 1962 and went into this initiation period. The belly of the whale was that I was the only boy, even after the second year of school desegregation, I was the only boy in the African-American boy in the school, and by that time I had become a civil rights agitator, as the newspaper called me. So the road of trials were harassment, the isolation, loss of academic standing. I had the highest grade point average at Dunbar High School before I integrated desegregated rather EC Glass. It took me until my senior year of high school to make honor roll again. There were courses that were offered at EC Glass that we knew nothing about at Dunbar. At Glass, I was able to take a course in creative writing. I was able to take calculus. I took 4 years of Spanish. None of that was offered at my previous school. So the tests and ordeals that I went through were daily harassments. I remember the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Someone yelled out of the crowd, "Your hero is dead." It was the first time I had gotten into a fight the whole time that I had been in the school. So I went through this crucifixion of having to deal with the daily isolation, the daily harassments. In the middle of this, a pastor, Presbyterian pastor, was able to get a scholarship offer for me from Andover, which is the same school that the first George Bush went to. My father told me that I couldn't go, that I needed to finish what I started, and that was a kind of a crucifixion for me. But the resurrection for me was that from that I evolved into becoming the youth civil rights leader there, and the boon was bringing back home access to public facilities within the city and connecting to the larger movement that was taking place all along the country. I'll move on from that to look at some of these other views, because we talked about a satellite view. The heroic journey served as a very good methodology for processing how one moves through the stages of a life narrative, and very often there are several narratives within that life narrative. But in order to have a fuller understanding, sometimes we have to back up and take a wider angle view. For me, integral theory, particularly the quadrant model, satisfied that. We're usually known through this upper right quadrant by our performance, by our behavior. However, our behavior is usually determined by this upper left quadrant, our thoughts, our beliefs, our values. But we didn't get those, we didn't come into life with those values. They came from somewhere. Those values are derived from these two lower quadrants, from the social networking that takes place within the collective that we're a part of, our family, the relationships that we have, the neighborhoods that we come from, the churches that we attend. All of those help to develop and define our beliefs and our values, but also the systems that we find ourselves engaged in, systems of social service, government, the isms that all take place are all part of these systems. So in order to get a fuller understanding of the progression of the heroic journey, one has to have an opportunity to kind of pull back and see a wider scope. For me, this quadrant model, this AQUAL model, helps me to be able to look at the broader perspective and to allow that broader perspective to help with the attentiveness and intentionality of moving along on that journey. And then we also need this more Google Map 3D view, which for me was theory U. Otto Scharmer makes the point that there are two sources of learning, and if we're going to be able to proactively engage the heroic journey, we need to have a learning process, a learning theory, a formulated learning process by which we engage that journey. And I would suggest that that this needs to take place at each of the stages and at each of the steps. Our learning process has to be clearly thought out and clearly defined. So Scharmer says that there are only two sources of learning. Either we learn by reflecting on past experiences, or we learn by focusing on the emerging future. This concept of focusing on the emerging future really spoke to me because out of my tradition, out of my spiritual tradition, very often we talk about purpose and destiny and destination. And so this concept of operating from the emerging future rather than simply making choices and decisions based on past experiences really spoke loudly to me. But Scharmer helps us to understand that normally we operate from a blind spot. This is this is our default programming, and we need to be able to recognize this default programming. This blind spot is this inner place from which we operate by default, that part of us that we usually don't see, that inner place or source from which we operate. And so Sharma presents this you. How can we move from these past patterns of downloading to moving up the right side of the U to actually performing by operating from the whole, or performing by operating from a future that is beckoning us. In order to do that, we have to be able to operate from an open mind, an open heart, and an open will. So to operate from this open mind, open heart, open will, there are steps that we take. And again, these steps in theory U, I would suggest, have to be performed at each stage and each step of the heroic journey if we're going to be attentional and intentional. So to move from downloading, we have to suspend what we think we're seeing and begin to see with fresh eyes. We have to begin to redirect our thinking by sensing from where we are in this field of operation, whether we're in the center of it or on the periphery of it or somewhere located in another place on the field. And then we've got to let go of our predetermined notions about how we operate. And we have to ask these existential questions that motivate us. Who is my authentic self, and what is my real work, what I'm being called to do? In order to do that, we have to address these voices that speak to us, that try to deter us in the process of this journey. Voices of judgment, voices of cynicism, and voices of fear. We address the voice of judgment with an open mind. We address the voice of cynicism with an open heart. We address the voice of fear with an open will. Nancy, how am I doing in time?
I think you have about, maybe about another 20 minutes.
Okay. There are particularly suggested activities that need to take place in moving along the U to begin to, for example, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to bring all of them up, but let me just highlight a few. On the left side of the U, if we're going to stop this habitual routine of downloading and suspend what we have been doing in that process and move into observing, and then from observing to sensing, I want to deal with this moving from observing to sensing. You need to have a sense and a share of the big picture if you're going to move from observing to sensing, a connection and listen in real time. What that meant for me as I was moving from being a school desegregator to becoming a civil rights leader, my father took me to the March on Washington to kind of make a connection to what was going on in the rest of the country. Of course, by that time I had already met Dr. King, and though I did not have a favorable position in terms of location on the Lincoln Memorial lawn that day, I was really far away, couldn't even see Dr. King. I could hear his voice. I already had this connection with him, and having this connection with him also gave me a connection with the larger sense of what was going on that day. It is interesting when I began to research what was going on in my hometown and the activity that many of us as youth were performing in terms of the civil rights movement in my hometown. I realized that what we were doing in Lynchburg predated the children's campaign in Birmingham by a full year. And so we were already utilizing young people. We were already beginning to go to jail before that process began to take place in Birmingham. And so we were making this connection to this bigger picture, and we had some sense of awareness of the impact that was beginning to take place all over the country. If we go down to the bottom of the U to this idea of sensing, I was getting coaching from the adults that were being involved in the movement. We had the support of the faith community. We would have these mass meetings and rallies at the churches. And I was told very recently, I did not know this, but I had a chance to visit my home church just about 2 months ago in Lynchburg, and I was told by one of the older people there, she said, Owen, when you were going to school at EC Glass, we had people stationed all along the route that were watching over you and Linda and praying for you and Linda all along the way. After almost 50 years, I had no idea that was going on, but that kind of coaching, that kind of off-site leadership was being provided to help walk us through that. And so I want to move up to this idea of moving from presencing to inspiring. So this is where the whole idea of story is involved. Our stories very often intersect with stories of others, and sometimes, in fact, more often than not, we're on journeys along with other people. I would suggest that families can take journeys together, or that whole communities can take journeys together. Certain organizations take journeys together. And so we need to connect our individual stories with the stories of those that are fellow journeyers with us. Now, if you are not proactive in terms of operating from this GPS, this heroic journey, these different views of the heroic journey, then by default you will fall into this idea of absencing. If we're not practicing presencing, then by default we're practicing absencing. And you can look at that slide in your handouts and see how this might be a way of describing both what happens in a victim's journey and in a villain's journey. Nancy said that I am a scholar practitioner. So how do we practice? How have we practiced using this idea of living heroically? We have had contracts, projects with Danville Public Schools and Richmond Public Schools. We have a motherhood and fatherhood program with Henrico County Jail. And we have a faith-based leadership institute for community engagement. I'll share with you how we use this framework in each of these particular arenas that we're working in. With both Danville Public Schools and Richmond Public Schools, as I indicated earlier, we found out that Virginia leads the nation in incarcerating children in school. Virginia is incarcerating something like 12 out of every 1,000 students. We're beginning to turn that around a bit. The next closest state was Delaware, which was only incarcerating 6. A new police chief came to town here in Richmond, and he began to look at that data and determined that 40% of the kids that were being arrested in school were being arrested for this catch-all category of disorderly conduct. That could range from anything like from cussing a teacher out to refusing to take a seat in the classroom. But anytime you have security officers or police officers in classrooms, anytime you have to go through detectors in order to be able to get into the school, you're setting people up for failure. And so that was going on in both many of the schools in Danville and in Richmond. We developed a mentoring program for both at-risk and high-risk students. We trained our mentors in trauma-informed care, practice, and resiliency. And every every participant in our program, every mentee was given a risk, resiliency, and targeted behavior assessment pre and post test. We actually administered the risk, resiliency, and targeted behavior assessment, pardon me, at orientation at 6 months, at 9 months, and at a year. This risk, resiliency, and target behavior assessment was based on the 40 developmental assets designed by the Search Institute. We were very intentional in using these other methods, but our core, please excuse me, our core process was to help our young people to begin to understand the heroic journey and the and theory U and integral theory as we applied it to the journey. Because these young people were familiar with many of the hero movies, and if I had been able to play the video clip, you would have gotten a bit of a better sense of this. But because they're familiar with these action movies, these hero movies, they very quickly it very quickly resonated with them, and we began to help them to begin to locate themselves in terms of how they were performing hero or not performing hero, and how we could get them on a better trajectory. I am delighted to say that in Danville and Richmond, we had 92 mentees in the program. We trained 70 mentors, and we saw an 80% improvement in grades and behavior with the participants over a 2-year period. We wanted to also see how this might work with adults. And so I'm a pastor, and the church that I pastor is in a fairly unique position. In fact, we're told that we're the only church in the nation that's doing this by our local sheriff, who is very active in the National Sheriff's Association. We partnered with Henrico County, which is where I live, to go to the local jail and to pick up on a Sunday morning up to 15 men and up to 15 women. These men and women are all volunteers. They have to have reached the point of being on work release, and the vast majority of them are in an opioid program, opioid recovery program, because opioid addiction is at a critical factor in this country. We bring these participants. On average, we have between 20 and 25 participants on any given Sunday. After they have been with us for 3 weeks, we allow them to invite their families to come. They go through our worship service. After the worship service, they and their families, along with some of the workers in the church, enjoy a family meal together. After the family meal, we do motherhood training for the women, fatherhood training for the men. We use pre and post tests. Everyone has to have a trait hope scale and a scale of psychological well-being. So we're very intentional about how we track what's happening with our participants. We have had 63 participants since July of this past year. As an aside, since the third Sunday in December, we have actually baptized 22 participants from the jail. That is a phenomenal thing that's taking place. Faith and spirituality is helping in their overcoming their addiction. Of those 63 participants, and that includes current and former participants, only 3 have been reincarcerated. That's less than a 5% recidivism rate. Again, even though we're doing the fatherhood and motherhood training, our core training process is helping people to see how they're located on this heroic journey, to encourage them to live life heroically and to utilize the tenets that we have put together in developing this model on living heroically. Lastly, we have partnered with a small liberal arts college in Lynchburg, Virginia, Lynchburg College, soon to be named the University of Lynchburg next year. I approached them to create what we call the Faith-Based Leadership Institute for Community Engagement. The initial idea behind it was that faith leaders, even if they have formal training, they're not trained in community engagement. They might have some training in evangelism or something of that nature, but they're not trained on how to create effective community partnerships, how to utilize concepts like asset-based community development, how to create high-performing teams. We utilize change theory. We talk about the styles of leadership and leadership fundamentals. We engage them in understanding how trauma, particularly trauma associated with poverty, impacts urban settings. And these participants go through a 6-month program. We meet once a month for a full day, and these are the type of course offerings that we provide. We just finished our first cohort. There were 20 participants in the cohort. 12 of them were from Lynchburg. 8 of them traveled 2 hours once a month on a Saturday from Richmond. It so happens that Richmond and Lynchburg have the 2 highest poverty rates in the state. As part of our initial cohort, we had the vice mayor of Lynchburg, a city council person, a school board member, the city clerk, a director of communication. There were several pastors and different community activists, and they all paid to be a part of this initial cohort of the Faith-Based Leadership Institute. And once again, we utilized the concepts that we have developed in using the heroic journey as a directional GPS process. Ultimately, what we're trying to get at with our participants, and I got a slide out, is how do we create authentic leadership within each of these groups that we're working with. Part of the responsibility of an authentic leader is to be reflective and to also encourage reflection among those that they're leading, but also to connect internal processes with external actions, so that our purpose has to be connected to a passion. And you get the idea from this chart that we have here. I will say that we were doing a fairly decent job of working with these different populations before I ever knew anything about Union Institute and University and ECL and the Martin Luther King specialization. But having had a chance to go through the doctoral program there, meeting activist scholars like Dr. Boxall and many others there, Dr. Rafante, really took my understanding to what I call a steroid level, and we were able to begin to not only be good practitioners, but to be able to provide good research behind what we were doing, so that we could quantify our results, and so that we might be able to encourage others by the successes that we've had, that we were not any longer simply telling good stories about, but that we could show in a scholarly manner the effects of the work that we've been doing. Thank you for your attention. Again, thank the committee for inviting me to share this. I hope that I have inspired somebody or encouraged somebody today, and I'm ready now for any comments or questions.
So, well, Owen, we absolutely thank you for being really a wonderful guide as many of us try to figure out this balance of scholar practitioner. One of the things, and Owen touched on it just as he was ending, that I hope you heard and found valuable is that so many of you already are engaged in social change activity and social justice work. And so there is always the opportunity then to expand the work, reshape the work, focus the work using the tools that you're gaining along your way. So when you're in program evaluation, thinking about things a little bit differently. When you're in policy analysis, thinking about things a little bit differently. As you're critically analyzing work that others have done and written about, how does that help you to become a finer tool in the work that you want to do? So we have some questions. I hope you'll keep typing them in. And one of the questions, Owen, that's come up is about intersectionality. Can you talk about how the concept of intersectionality has played or can play a part in the work that you're doing?
Interdisciplinarity was what attracted me to union in the first place.
And did you hear me? Did you hear me say intersectionality?
I heard you say intersectionality.
Okay, you're just starting with interdisciplinary. Gotcha.
Right.
We're together.
Yes. Because this was my third bite at the apple for a PhD program. And the first two just did not speak to me, did not work for me. As I began to think from an interdisciplinary vantage point, intersectionality then became a critical factor in how you bring different facets to a particular problem so that you're not looking at it just from one vantage point. I very often use as an analogy that in any given community, the problems in that community can be likened to a house. Depending upon which door or which window you look through, you get a different perspective on what that problem is. All these community problems are really tied into one another: racism, poverty, crime, all of these things, and just depends on which window or which view you want to look at. But depending on which view you determine that you're going to approach the problem with, you're going to have to use the concept of intersectionality to bring in aspects of those other things. For example, when we talk about trauma, this whole idea of trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practice has become the buzzword in counseling now. I began to ask the question and found out that there was some research being done. Isn't racism a traumatic event, and what is the impact of the trauma of racism on a child's ability? When we talk about the achievement gap, my contention is that we're not simply talking about academics, we're talking about the totality of a child being able to engage in the classroom. So when we look at things that way, this concept of intersectionality becomes an important factor there.
Perfect. Thank you. There have also been a couple of questions about replicating the program that you described for us today. In particular, one particular, the motherhood, fatherhood program, but certainly the work with the young men as well. So it's a two-part question. One part of the question is, what's the possibility of replicating these programs? And then connected to that was, could the programs, in your view, be replicated in a secular fashion without the combination of a church or religious institution?
Absolutely. In terms of replication, as they say, hit me up and we'll talk about it. But in terms of motherhood and fatherhood program, we actually are part of a larger initiative in Henrico County that's addressing the issue of motherhood and fatherhood in totality. We are primarily focusing on mothers and fathers who are incarcerated, and so that's kind of our little niche of the program. But we're part of a collaborative that's made up of social service agencies, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations that are doing work in motherhood and fatherhood development.
Great. So you'll send out your email address.
If I go back to the slide.
All right.
There's my email address there.
Perfect. There is another slide that one of our audience wanted you to return to, and that was the slide on absence and presence. Do you know which one they might be referring to? And might you be able to go back to that for a minute and discuss that again, if you will, or in a little more detail?
Yeah, as you can see by the labels there, and this is actually, you can download this from the Presencing Institute website, or you can Google Otto Scharmer. Actually, you can go to Google Images and type in presencing and absencing, and this will bring up this particular slide. But I got this from attending the Presencing Institute. You can see the labels there, social emergence versus social pathology. So that in my model, while a victim's journey might necessarily be equated with social pathology, there is a kind of pathology that's involved in that, so that I am likening this absencing to what we would see in a villain's journey and a victim's journey. Again, you're moving from a downloading rather than a progressive path to a destructive path. You can certainly see this in a social predator, where and one might say, I'm being very careful about what I say here. One might say that some of that is being represented in the anger that seems to be taking place in America today. If you follow this pathway of social pathology, it evolves into an economies of destruction. It is a scorched earth process. I don't know that I can say very much more than that, except just like in presencing, there are voices that you are addressing, voices of judgment, voices of cynicism, voices of fear. You address that with an open mind, an open heart, and an open will. In terms of absencing, you embrace the voice of judgment, the voice of cynicism, and the voice of fear, so that you get, in the voice of judgment, you get stuck in this, one truth, this one view, one world view. In terms of cynicism, you get stuck in this us versus them mentality. In terms of addressing the voice of fear, you get stuck in my way or the highway, this self-will, and everybody else be damned. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. There's another question being asked about, again, a two-part question. The first part is asking you to talk a bit about what you understand as speaker vulnerability in storytelling. And then the second part of that question is for you to talk a bit about the level of success you have observed as folks may attempt to move from victim or villain to their own hero.
Well, this idea of speaker vulnerability is an interesting question. Obviously, as practitioners, if we're going to encourage storytelling and the utilization of story to reframe the narrative, there has to be relationship. Too often, and I say this about the church, I love the church, but I'm very critical of the church, even though I'm a pastor. Too often the church approaches situations in one of two ways. We have this sin mentality where we feel like we got to fix everybody, or we have this social service mentality where we feel like we got to help everybody, when what really is needed is an empowerment mentality where we encourage people to be their best authentic selves. And I think that is a critical factor in addressing the issue of speaker vulnerability. It is a daunting task to tell one story and to run the risk of having that story to be rejected or minimized, and therefore not be encouraging at all, but encourage, but rather to evolve into further isolation. A lot of that takes place with these youth, these inner city youth, this lack of trust with the establishment, this lack of trust with authority. And so the question of speaker vulnerability is very important to address. I don't remember what the second part of the question was.
Just to talk about the success, levels of success or arena of success that you've observed as folks try to move from victim or villain to being their own hero.
Well, this is like eating an elephant, and we have to accept that. I met with the sheriff of Henrico County the other day for lunch, and he asked me, once people finish their period of incarceration and they leave the program, or once they're placed on a home incarceration, how many of them actually come back to the church? And I said to him, not many. But they cannot unlearn what they have learned. And the fact is that for a 15-month period right now, we've only seen 3 people be arrested for an additional crime. So this is, though, like eating an elephant. You have to do it one bite at a time, and success is incremental. I know that many of us would like to see phenomenal success overnight, but it just doesn't happen.
Thank you. There are lots of questions coming in, so I'm doing my best to combine them, and just delighted that the presentation is triggering so much thought and enthusiasm. One question, actually this is a two-part question. It's a request that you put your email address up one more time so folks can be sure to have it. And then a companion question is, are you hiring?
I wish.
So not
many of you that deal with nonprofits know that when you live by the grant, you die by the grant. When we have grants, we have huge staffs. When we have no grants, I'm it.
All right. This is a question that shifts us a little bit to the policy arena. You talked about early on in the presentation some things that are happening in schools that, in your view, are recipes for failure or set folks up for failure. Are there some policies that you believe could be re-examined or developed that might change some or all of that?
Oh yeah, public policy is such a huge factor here, and very often, I'm going to be generous. I'm going to say very often there are unintentional consequences from public policy. I remember several years ago, I had been invited to observe at Congress at the reauthorization of the Second Chance Act. It so happened that at the same time, No Child Left Behind and the TANF program were up for reauthorization at the same time. And I was in one of the legislators' office, and I asked one of his staff, has anyone ever considered doing impact study of bills? Because it seemed to me that TANF, No Child Left Behind, and Second Chance had some commonalities, especially in terms of the people that they were serving. And the staffer looked at me as if horns were coming out of my head. We see, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. This probably happens in a lot of states, but we're dealing with it right here in Virginia right now. A person gets arrested for a traffic violation or for child support, or they owe fines and fees to the court. And so what the Department of Motor Vehicles and the courts do here is to take away their license until they pay their fines and their fees. Well, taking away the license only precludes them from being able to go to work to pay the fines and the fees. And so what do people do? Some people take a chance and they drive on expired and revoked licenses. They get caught, they get reincarcerated, the fines increase, and so we just passed a common sense bill here that I don't think went far enough, but it leads us a step in the right direction, that a person's capability of paying fines and fees has to be taken into consideration, and they have to be given an opportunity to make payment arrangements. That's a lot better than it was, but from my point of view, it doesn't go far enough. So I think that too often we have the argument of personal responsibility versus public policy. I think that it cannot be an either or, it has to be a both and proposition.
Okay, thank you. So returning now to your discussion, I think that this is a particular question. This person thinks that you said that a victim's journey ends in returning to a life of struggle. Could you say a little bit about, does the hero's journey end as well with returning to a life of struggle, or what are the ends on these journeys? What's the GPS showing us?
Well, when I use the term struggle there, I'm talking about a different kind of struggle. I'm talking about very often economics, just kind of getting by, um, living life in a reactionary fashion rather than a proactive fashion. And so I could have been a bit more deliberative about defining that, but that's what I mean. I think that all of us, whether heroic, victim, or villain, engage in some fashion of struggle.
Okay. Now, early in the presentation, you talked about the work of Zimbardo and Campbell, and you, the questioner thinks that you offered us some things that each offered that seemed difficult to reconcile. Can you talk about the ways in which you reconciled their thinking?
I'd like a bit more information from the questioner.
Okay, so if that person could retype that question, I'll try to ask it more clearly. And in the meantime, when you referenced the prison project early in the presentation, what do you know about the kinds of difficulties that those men, I assumed, experienced as they moved from prison to community?
Pretty much, you name it. You name it, they experienced it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I hear this phrase. This isn't my first trip around the block. I think, I know for a fact, many people that we're talking to that are in our motherhood and fatherhood program have indicated that they've been incarcerated multiple times at this, and that they have even though they might be off of drugs for a period of time, they have relapsed in their drug use. It is a constant struggle for them. But I've also seen people. I have people within my own congregation that are 20, 30 years clean, and not just a small number. It is a question of being able to put the right kind of network around you. Where we see the most problem is when people, whether by choice or by circumstance, end up going back to the same environment, the same network that they had. We really try to encourage them to get a new network, a new supportive network. We can almost predict that if they go back to the same neighborhood, if they go back to the same crowd, they're going to be right back in jail or in prison.
Okay. So I'm shifting now to this notion, and as you say, we were not able to see the video, but you did talk about the notion of extraordinary. Hero is extraordinary powers and capabilities, and the action figures and movies that young people engage today seems to emphasize the extraordinary. How does one start to think about extraordinary in their own life?
Yeah, we talk about the big H hero and the little H hero. We spend a lot of time talking about that. And our definition of living heroically is ordinary people who do extraordinary things. And we don't try to define what that extraordinary thing is. For an individual, that extraordinary thing could be a child who has a single parent household and who has an incarcerated father, that child graduating from high school, that can be living heroically. And so we try to help people to find their own path, their own identification of what a hero is. But we are very intentional about talking about the difference between a big H hero and a little h hero. For some people, you know, for example, if you have struggled with a disease like ADHD, if you can just make it calmly through a day, that's living heroically.
Wow. I had to take a pause on that. That's powerful. Another question that's come through is the belief that Campbell talks about talismans and the value of friends who support. And this question asks you to talk about any talismans and friends who supported on your journey.
Oh, I had fellow travelers. By the time we, if you'll notice the actual date, we integrated the school system in the middle of the school year. For a half of a school year, there were only 2 of us there. But prior to that, we had an opportunity to meet with leaders from the Student Government Association. Now, you know, we're talking about 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds, so there's going to be the normal teenage stuff going on. So it was not unusual for those persons that we had met in a safe environment to just kind of protect their normal friendships, you know, in terms of dealing with us. But we had a very strong social network outside of the school. I still maintain the same group of friends. I went to the same parties. There were different rituals that took place at EC Glass than at Dunbar. For example, the big thing at EC Glass was the junior ring dance. At Dunbar, it was the senior prom. So that was a different ritual that we performed. We had something at EC Class that was a senior day where, and we had senior day at Dunbar, but senior day at EC Glass, you dressed up as if it were Mardi Gras. And so I spent the whole day walking around as a country preacher. Predictive, huh? But you know, some of that was about learning the new rituals and having people that could kind of walk you through those new rituals so that you didn't feel strange. And then we had a very strong church network. So we, you know, there were those friends and talismans and helps all along the way. The real periods of isolation were I would say not as normative as one might think. After a while, there were friends in different classes. By the time the second year came around, Brenda and Cecilia came, and then there were 10 other students that were in the 9th grade. We were 10th graders by then. By the time I graduated from EC Glass, we had about 30 African Americans in a school of about 2,600.
Well, all right. One question has come up about how the Academy has received your work, which is work that tries to, of course, integrate scholarship and praxis. What's been your experience as you've now in the Academy exposing this kind of work or discussing this kind of work?
Well, first of all, I can say I haven't received any resistance, so that's been wonderful. I get this kind of aha. I hadn't thought of it that way. As you know, Nancy, one of the things that I discovered in my research is that Ken Wilber and Otto Scharmer had a number of conversations about engaging in work together. That did not take place, and when I went to a Presidency Institute and had a chance to share with Otto Scharmer, I was writing my dissertation at that time, my thinking, he said to me that I might be the one to finally bring his work and Wilbur's work together. That is far too daunting a task. Hopefully I put a spade in the ground and these wonderful scholars that are on this call can pick it up and expand the work.
Okay. And now I may have a little bit more clarity about the Campbell question. So if you could talk a bit more about your research process and how you came to develop your own methodology or your own approach, knowing that there was this work out there on Campbell, by Campbell and Zimbardo. Maybe that would be helpful or explanatory.
Actually, because, as I had indicated, because this was kind of my third bite at the PhD apple, I came to Union having a general idea of what I wanted to do my research around. And with some degree of intentionality, I tried to make sure that any paper that I had to write was in that general framework. So I didn't know anything about Joseph Campbell until I came to Union. And then the process became progressive as I became enamored with this idea of a heroic journey, and Dr. Tony Gregory and Dr. Rafanti had done some work around integral theory, and I was blessed to have Tony Gregory as a professor in a couple of my classes. I got a little better understanding of integral theory. Of course, it's cast as the theory of everything, and I believe that he tried to make it a theory of everything, but there were some things in that proved to be of great facility for me and what I was trying to get to. When I finally became introduced to Theory U, it really sort of closed the circle for me. Postdoctoral work, though, I have utilized additional concepts, appreciative inquiry, for example, and another one escapes my mind right now. I'm having a senior moment, but you know, as you become exposed to different concepts, from time to time you have this aha moment. The PhD program for me was quite a bit like entering into an all-you-can-eat cafeteria, and while everything did not suit my appetite, there were things for me that I could pull off the counter that made for a satisfying meal.
All right. So, and it's lunchtime, so that's a good. We're feeling some of that. There's one area that we haven't touched on too much in detail, and if I haven't stated your question, any of you, if I haven't asked the question or a question that touches on your inquiry, now would be the time for you to send it through again. But this particular question is about the juvenile justice system and the in Virginia, apparently the governor has a policy around parole and serving 85% of a sentence. And what have you seen that has what's been the impact of that, particularly on juveniles?
Virginia is not very friendly to people who are incarcerated. We are one of only 3 states that don't automatically restore voting rights to persons who are incarcerated. In the juvenile system, they stick to the guidelines and in the adult system, that 85% of the sentence has to be served before one is eligible for probation or parole. In Virginia also, the cost of incarceration for a juvenile can be charged to the family, depending on the family's ability to pay. This is something that has received some national attention in a few other states, but more recently, Virginia has adopted a policy of not incarcerating youth in juvenile detention centers away from home, but to try to make sure that that they are treated within their particular locality. That is in a phased process right now. There is a dismantling of the 2 or 3 large juvenile facilities, a rebuilding of smaller facilities that are going to be more dorm-like in their approach, but a push for more programmatic activities taking place at the local level.
Good. This is an area we haven't talked about yet, but there's a question about self-image, community image, and media. And so do you find that the popular media has a impact on the young people's self-image? And then the companion question would be, as those young people change their own self-image, what then is their response to the popular media?
Well, what I'm beginning to understand is that youth are not locked into the popular media. So while we see the kind of misrepresentations that many of us have grown accustomed to, for example, I can pretty much count on any one of the 3 local stations here in their nightly news. I can count on there being several reports on crime, several particularly shooting crimes. They will pretty much be the highlights on the news, and more often than not, when it's an African American, you can pretty much know that. When it is someone other than Hispanic or African American, you kind of have to guess at who they are. So you see that kind of representation in the popular media. But unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, youth are more acclimated to social media. And so they are informing themselves and being informed by those who have the same information that they have. So they're reinforcing one another's understanding and ideas. Then they're really locked into the hip hop culture. You know, their stars, their heroes are the gangster rappers. I guess we don't call them gangster rappers anymore, but you pretty much know many of them emulate the thug life, and so those negative narratives that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation have become, for many inner city youth in particular, a normal way of looking at life, and for many of them an aspiration. Unfortunately, I have a son who has been in the criminal justice system for going on 20 years off and on now, and he's got 2 more years that he has to serve, and that's part of what kind of motivates me. But one of the things that he shares with us when we go to see him or when he calls is he sees generations of men from the same family, and very often people that he knows. So I don't think that youth are being so much um, um, informed by the popular large media like newspaper and television, but more informed by their social media networks, Facebook, um, um, FaceTime, all those kinds of things that they do, Twitter. That's where they're getting their information.
Good, thank you. I have 2 more questions for you, Owen, and one is about the mental health system and resources, and the questioner asks, do you think the lack of mental health resources influences the school to prison pipeline within African American population? Although you talked about not a pipeline but a trail, I think, but the question is around mental health, access to mental health resources.
There's no question about it. Not only in terms of the school. You see, one of the things that I'm starting to become a bit clearer on is, for example, you take post-traumatic stress disorder. A person does not have to have full-blown disorder to be impacted by post-traumatic stress. And so what many of our youth are dealing with is toxic stress, post-traumatic stress from just general difficulty of life in the inner city, impacts of poverty and the like. And so if we don't provide more mental health resources, we're going to continue to get what we're getting. Another thing is both our county sheriff and the sheriff in the core city make the statement that we're incarcerating entirely too many people who the only reason for them being there is that we don't have mental health support that they need. So we're incarcerating people that we ought to be providing medication for.
Sure, sure. All right, so I'll ask this last question, and then and see if you have any closing comments. I have 60 seconds of closing comments. So the last question is, were there times along your journey when you questioned whether or not you would reach your objective?
How about every other day? I think that's that's part of our human story. We're constantly, pretty much, at least on a weekly basis, faced with challenges that we think are going to do us in. But very often all you have to do is just chillax. Just take a pause and kind of redirect your thinking. But absolutely, there were any number of times that I didn't think I was going to make it. But I had people encouraging me along the way. Just when I thought that something might close down on the one hand, something else would open up on the other hand, and life just works that way.
Owen, do you have any final wrap-up comments that you would want to share with us at this time?
Yes, I want to encourage those that are on the call today. I said it in a joking fashion, but I'm really serious about this. We're at a very critical juncture in our nation. And rather than to choose up sides, I think the nation is begging for people with a real desire for humanity to excel and to not simply survive. I think we're tired of these us-them posturing, and there are any number of questions that are begging for solutions that are possibly resident right here on this call. And so I really do consider that I have only kind of put a spade in the ground with this sort of methodology that we have developed. If it speaks to you, I certainly encourage you to reach out to me. We can dialogue or go it on your own. But there is so much power on this particular call. I'm going back to my faith tradition. It was said of the disciples of Jesus that the 12 of them were upsetters of the world. Well, if 12 men can upset the world, what can 84, 90 men and women that are on this journey really do to turn our country around?
My goodness. Well, as we close out, I certainly want to thank Mary Amos and her team for standing alongside us and behind us as we move always through successfully the technological challenges. And I know that the MLK specialization and MLK committee would want to thank Dr. Rafanti for helping us highlight the very excellent work of one of our MLK specialization folks. All of the MLK dissertations, as all of the dissertations from our program, are found in the library. And Dr. Greg Bailey, the first Virgil Wood Award dissertation, is in the library, as is Dr. Owen Cardwell's, and of course, the dissertations of all of our graduates. So it's worthwhile, I think, to spend some time looking at that work. I thank everybody for making this an engaging time during our mid-semester residency. And I'll close with a rather perhaps personal comment or observation. One thing I didn't mention as I introduced Owen was that as Dr. Virgil Wood was bringing the idea of the MLK specialization to the Union for consideration, one of the things that he did was to gather together activist pastors from several parts of the country. And we met in Texas and to try to imagine what this program might look like. And one of the people who came to that meeting was Owen Cardwell. So Owen has been a part of the imagining of the specialization. And for me, it's really a quite wonderful journey to have been there from the very beginning, the glimmer in the eye, so to speak. And then the path that you've taken, Owen, and to know, I think it's inspirational for all of us to know that attaining the doctorate was a point on your journey. And clearly, as you have demonstrated today, not the end of your journey. Your work goes on, and it gives all of us renewed confidence, renewed commitment, renewed energy for our work as scholar practitioners to go on. You are an example of the very best of our program, and you lead us forward in a quite imaginative and original way. And so with that, I will say to everyone, stay focused, stay healthy, get sleep, and enjoy the rest of what I hope is a good spring day. Thank you, everyone. See you all in your breakout.